Hey guys, in this video we're just going to look at how to simplify radicals, more specifically non-perfect squares. So to begin, we're just going to list out the first 15 perfect squares. 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So that's basically just saying 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared, etc. The number in purple is when you take the square root of 1, you get 1. When you take the square root of 4, you get 2. When you take the square root of 9, you get 3, etc. So, when we want to simplify a non-perfect square, we need to look for the largest perfect square and then the remaining factor. So, if you know your perfect squares, this topic should be easy. So we're just going to take 128, and because that's a larger number, it might be hard to figure out what goes into 128 evenly. So you could do 128 divided by x in your y equals and pull up the table. I always recommend starting from the error message. And the reason why we have errors is because if we divide anything by 0, it is undefined. So we're going to start on the right-hand side underneath the error message. 128 is not a perfect square, but if I go down, I should see that 64 is my largest perfect square. So my two factors that go into 128, perfect square and non-perfect square, is 64 and 2. So I would do 64 times radical 2 is 128. The square root of 64 is 8. And I'm left with a radical 2. So my final answer is 8 radical 2. To check if you did that correctly, you can go in your home screen and do the square root of 128 to get 11.313. And then if I do 8 radical 2, I should see that my decimals match up, which means I did simplify correctly. So we're just going to continue on. The square root of 8, we want a perfect square and a non-perfect square. So the largest perfect square that goes into 8 is 4, and I'm left over with a radical 2. The square root of 4 is 2, and I'm left over with radical 2. Now let's look at 27. I need a perfect square and a non-perfect square. So for 27, we should notice that 9 goes into 27 times 3. 9 times 3 gets me the 27. The square root of 9, this one right here is the perfect square. Square root of 9 is 3, right? 3 times 3 is 9, and I'm left over with a radical 3. For the next one, for 180, it might be hard for you guys to see what goes into 180. So you're going to do 180 divided by x. Again, start underneath the error message. 180 is not a perfect square. 90, not a perfect square. 60, not a perfect square. 45, not a perfect square, but 36 is, because 6 times 6 is 36. So we're going to do 36 and 5. Square root of 36 times square root of 5 gets me 180. The square root of 36 is 6, and I'm left over with a radical 5. Let's look at 12. Two numbers that go into 12, one being a perfect square, should be 4 and 3. The square root of 4, again, is 2, and I'm left over with a radical 3. For 300 any multiple of 100, such as 100, 200, 300, the largest perfect square would be 100, but I'm just going to show you. 300 divided by x. Again, start underneath the error message. Not a perfect square. 150, not a perfect square. 100 is a perfect square. So it's radical 100 times radical 3. The square root of 100 is 10, and we're left over with radical 3. And then the last one, you should notice that the square root of 144 is a perfect square, right? 144 is a perfect square, 12 times 12. So this one's slightly different. You're not going to have a radical left over because when you take the square root of perfect square, it is just a number, right? 12 times 12 is 144. And if you were unsure, when you go to your home screen, you do not get any decimal values after the 12, making it known that it is a perfect square. Thank you.